welcome to Inside. Prime Minister Narendra Modi is on his 5-nation tour. On his first official visit to the gas-rich country of Qatar, Prime Minister met Gulf countries' leaders on Sunday to discuss economic ties. Qatar is one of the world's largest suppliers of liquefied natural gas. Modi also met local businessmen and encouraged them to invest more in India. He also met Indian labourers who formed a considerable part of the country's labour force. More than 500,000 Indians live in Qatar. 7 agreements have been signed between the two countries. India and Qatar have agreed to share intelligence to combat hawala transactions and terror financing. The two nations highlighted the need to isolate the sponsors and supporters of terrorism and agreed that urgent action against all such entities supporting terrorism must be taken. The visit has regional, economic and strategic significance.
Prime Minister Narendra Modi is in Switzerland after finishing his engagements in Qatar, where he held wide-ranging talks with the leadership of the gas-rich Gulf nation to curb hawala and terror financing. In Qatar, like in Saudi Arabia and Iran, energy issues featured prominently on the agenda. Last year, India imported 65% of its liquefied natural gas from Qatar. The two countries signed 7 agreements, including memorandums on tourism, financial cooperation, infrastructure investment, cultural cooperation and healthcare cooperation. They decided to move beyond trading relationship to strategic investments. As per one memorandum of understanding signed during the visit, Qatar will invest in India's National Investment and Infrastructure Fund. The Prime Minister also addressed the Indian diaspora. After Qatar, PM Modi's busy week of diplomacy will now continue in Switzerland, where he will discuss financial transparency issues among other topics before heading to Washington. In the United States, Prime Minister Modi will address a joint session of Congress. Your report.
And Prime Minister Narendra Modi is in Switzerland on a day-long visit where he is likely to seek support for India's membership to the elite 48-member nuclear suppliers group, or the NSG. He is also likely to raise the issue of black money stashed by Indians in Swiss banks. And to discuss more on the significance of the Prime Minister's 5-nation tour, I'm joined by former Ambassador Mr. Sajjanhar, as well as Mr. Sanjay Kapoor, who's editor, Heart News. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
I'd like to start the discussion with you, Ambassador Sajjanhar. How do you look at the fact that this was his Prime Minister's first official visit to Qatar, and it comes in a series: Saudi Arabia, Iran, now Qatar. Is this all about energy cooperation or much beyond that?
Much beyond that. And as you said very rightly, it comes after Saudi Arabia, Iran, but also we need to see that it also comes after the United Arab Emirates.
That's
so
right.
So 4 countries in West Asia in 1 year. I don't think any other Indian Prime Minister has done that before this. Of course, trade is a very significant matter, bilateral cooperation, hydrocarbons, energy. As the reporter said, 65% of the LNG comes from there. Also diaspora, 630,000. The largest expatriate community in Qatar is Indian. And also now strategically it has become extremely significant because as with the other 3 countries that the Prime Minister has visited, UAE, Saudi Arabia, Iran, the issue of terrorism and also along with that radicalization of the local population, that has become a very significant matter. So if you look at the 7 agreements that have been signed, one of them deals squarely with combating money laundering and combating financing, terror financing. So this is a very important issue. All these countries have become very cognizant of the rise of terrorism in that area, and also in terms of strategic investment, because the Qatar Sovereign Fund has significant resources at its disposal, and they are looking at different countries where they can profitably invest these resources. And India is, of course, a very welcome opportunity. That is what the Prime Minister said. India is the economy fastest expanding, 7.9% growth, notwithstanding the fact that last 2 years have been we have been drought stricken.
Yep.
So he has invited the fund and also the Qatari businessmen to look more proactively at India, whether it is in the area of hydrocarbons, it's in the area of railways, it's in the area of infrastructure. So lots of possibilities.
Lots of possibilities, as you've just said. But India has been purchasing about 7.5 million tons of LNG every year from Qatar since 2010. The Qatari media has, in fact, has said that it supplies India with more than 85% of its gas needs. Interestingly, there had been investments at different levels, like in the field of telecommunication, and Qatar Airways has expressed its interest, in fact, in expanding its routes to India and buying a stake in the Indigo airline. But is it, I'll ask you the same question, Mr. Sanjay Kapoor, is it around economy and energy cooperation, investment opportunities which India would like to explore with Qatar, or is it more beyond that?
I mean, we must recognize that Qatar actually punches far above its weight. Quite some time back, people who were critical of Qatar would call it a country with some 200 people and a TV station. That's Al Jazeera, which has so much of influence over what we witnessed in the last 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
And God has been kind to Qatar because of this enormous gas field that they have, and their ability to make so much money out of it. Is that they are in a position to host a World Cup into 2022, for which they are working very hard. So in a certain way, it is not just limited to what we are saying in terms of energy need. Although if you see a pattern, the Prime Minister has been to Saudi Arabia, has been to Iran, UAE, and all of them are are linked to energy security that India has been seeking for quite a while. And he's done it at a time when oil prices have been very soft. So it gives him an opportunity to somehow provide an assurance to these oil and gas producers that India is a downstream market, and surely that they will benefit from it. But there is far more to what Qatar would be seeking, because Qatar has been a player when it comes to the Middle East. There have been a lot of contradiction in much that we read. They say that they are fighting terror. One has to first of all define what terrorism is, because say for example in Syria, much of the instability has come in from people who are sponsoring many of these mercenaries who have gone into it, and there that clarity has to be there that people who try to destabilize a government of whichever, I mean elected government or a government which is in power, they has to be perceived as terror or not. So in terms of definition, those things have to be clarified. But when the Prime Minister is talking with the head of state or with the government which is there and talking about sharing intelligence on terror financing and such issues, it has to be taken seriously. But these are fundamentally perfunctory noises. There is a larger effort at the moment to see beyond what will really happen in the Middle East. That process is going on, and there is a certain kind of contestation which is visible pertaining to Iran, because in the coming days Iran is also going to supply LNG.
Yeah.
So you have on one hand oil and gas, but also on very major geostrategic issues how this is going to pan out, because Iran's oil field and gas field is also very, very big. And that is where the rub lies.
But you see, you said something very interesting on the terror financing part. A similar kind of cooperation agreement, in fact, India has seized this time with the UAE too, on sharing of the data and on nabbing the terrorists, so to say, I mean indirectly. How do you look at this approach that India is following with these countries, since I'm sure the knowledge that you were just talking about, I'm sure every country is aware of it. And every government is aware of the fact that the Middle East happens to be the place where all these countries have put their stakes, and there are in fact countries among these nations who are involved in one way or the other into this whole crisis.
You know, the entire thing rests on what is your narrative about terrorism, and if there is a convergence on your narrative with that of the UAE, and that has been the case. I mean, there have been people who have been picked up from UAE and brought in, a couple of one Mr. Ansari was there, who was brought in. There are a few more people that UAE was more happy to give it back to us. But the concept of terror in India and the concept of terror in UAE are in a certain way different, because there you have the royalty which is in power, which sometimes the people do not see eye to eye. So they see more in terms of their destabilization or what they may be doing in areas which they if the UAE doesn't agree with. I mean, people coming from, for example, Syrian rebels or the others, there could be a difference in perception, because some of them may be supported by the UAE government, but the others who may be there, they would disagree. So it is it's very fuzzy, the lines which operate in terms of your definition, as I said earlier. about who is really a terrorist. So, an Indian who commits a crime in India and goes and hides there, if you have dual criminality which you can establish, or there is a reciprocity in terms of in terms of your understanding, then those people can come in. But they may not find UAE may not be so in the sense averse to those people taking refuge, because this matter kept on coming up pertaining to Dawood Ibrahim,
Right.
because Dawood Ibrahim has many establishments, assets there, but he has not committed a crime there. And for quite a while he was seen to be a guest who was accommodated in the ruling elite there. So those issues continue to, in a certain way, cause problems within India, because the issue of dual criminality comes in, and then terror in a certain way makes it easy for governments to actually convey that a simple criminal is also a terrorist. So that branding changes many things, and it has been happening for many years.
You see, beyond these relations, the fact that the Prime Minister went and met the labourers over there. Now, Ambassador Sajjanhar, that's a very crucial element. There had been, in fact, reports from the Amnesty International and others which claim that the migrant labourers face a lot of abuse in some cases amounting to forced labour. Now, Indians do form a good part of the labour force there. What kind of how should one read this gesture of the Indian Prime Minister going and meeting the labour class and asking them, in fact, even about the regulations, and if they want some sort of change in those regulations, which the Indian government can pursue on their behalf with the
I think it can be looked at from different perspectives, different ways. Number one, of course, it sends out a very good message as far as the labourers themselves are concerned, that the head of government of the country is coming, and on landing, the first thing that he does is to come and meet them and to see them. His meeting with the Prime Minister is later on. He first comes and he addresses, I think his address was a very, very personal one, a personal message, like a person from the family. So I think that is at one level the message is going. The other message that he sent was that he referred to the fact that when the Emir had come last year to India, he had praised the contribution of the Indian workforce and of the Indian labour very much, and said that they are it's a good workforce, they are law-abiding citizens, and they are contributing in a big way to this. So this was a message that was going out to the Qatar authorities, that we expect you to take care of our people. And thirdly, I think another message to the Qatar authorities, that the Prime Minister of the country has the welfare of these people at heart. So, and he referred to this, that whatever problems you have, please let me know, and I'm going to when I'm going to be meeting the Prime Minister, the Emir, etc., I will raise these issues with them, and I don't have the slightest doubt, I don't have any reservations that all that you are asking for will be met. Now, I think it is going to be difficult, because as you mentioned yourself, the problems are varied, and the problems are very many in terms of the living conditions, in terms of the fact that their travel documents, identity documents, passport, etc., are taken away from them.
Yeah.
And so I think the problems are many, but this will definitely send a message of hope to the workers.
Yeah.
And a message that all these issues need to be taken seriously to the local host domestic authorities, establishment,
I think
and government.
That's a very interesting and a very important aspect of this visit, I would say, Mr. Kapoor. The fact that it really conveys a message to the administration of Qatar. The fact that an Indian Prime Minister goes and meets these labourers, along with, of course, the other group of businessmen and other investors.
That comes
but
later.
See, that comes later.
Yes.
But this part, the same evening when he lands there, the first thing he does is go and meet these labourers.
I think it is truly remarkable that he's chosen to give precedence to the workers, because Qatar, as he said, behind all the glitter, you also have this underside, which is the underbelly, which is the most disturbing. And you kind of horror stories that you hear not only from Qatar but also from UAE, how these workers have been treated. They've been harassed not only by the contractors but by the kind of attitude their authority showed towards them. There have been deaths not only from the Nepalese who are working there, the Indians and others, and because of the tight control that they exercise on information, that nothing really comes out of it.
Yes.
So even yesterday I was watching some TV and there was reports about Indian workers stranded there looking for some kind of succor or support from the PM. So in a certain way, in a very subtle way, the PM has actually conveyed to the administration that we may not say it upfront, but we are interested in their welfare. Don't mess around with them. But as I said, Qatar punches far above its weight. I remember a couple of years ago, they were bullying the Indian government to back them on Syria, to follow their line. And with the kind of money that has been at their disposal, they have really been strutting around. I mean, they think that they can do whatever they want. So from that standpoint, I think what the PM has done is rather well. He has projected that the government stands by our workers who have gone there. They are very vulnerable lot. They actually leave their homes because of employment. They do it because they have to, the remittances are very important, and those remittances are what sustain their families. And in a certain way, if the government of India continues to provide them the necessary backup, the harm and the violence that visits them during the time that they're working would not come to them. So I think it is a very good.
And how should Qatar's investment in India's National Investment Infrastructure Fund be seen? In which areas are we going to see the investment come in?
I think it is very clear what they have said, that we have an infrastructure fund in which the Qataris are going to come in. But the thing is that there are so many promises that are made. The process through which those promises have to translate are very critical. I remember when the PM had gone to UAE, there was so much joy and excitement that the UAE government is going to bring in about 75 billion and they will start investing it in India. And subsequently you had the UAE minister who came in, and he was under the impression that there are certain policy changes that would be done to absorb the investment that will come from UAE, and it doesn't happen in India like this. I mean, it's a democracy. It is not a country which is run by an authoritarian who would say, okay, come in and everything is going to change. Or it used to happen in the time of China. Mao would have a dream and say the Three Gorges Dam is going to be made like this. So he's not mindful of where the villagers are going to go, what will happen to the people. So it's a very argumentative, noisy, chaotic democracy, and those changes have to happen over a period of time. So these kind of things, I don't think many of our the people or the countries that the PM has visited really comprehend. So Qataris are willing to put in money in our investment sector, which is very critical, because one of the areas where India has to do very well is to perk up the investment, infrastructure to an international level. It's a slow progress, a work in progress. Right. It's not going to happen anytime soon. So it will take a while, and I think that's the area where they would like to put in money.
Ambassador Sajjan.
Well, I think all that has been said is very valid, but we also need to take cognizance of the fact that, number one, the amount of investment that has been coming into the country, that has been rising. In 2015, if the figures are to be believed, India was the largest recipient of foreign direct investment, $51 billion. And obviously, whether it is sovereign wealth funds or otherwise, or different countries, they are looking at places where they can park their money, where they can send their money, where they can get good benefit and advantage for their money. And so in that context, I think there are opportunities. And there are, what I have found many a times when I have been in different countries as ambassador looking after commercial work, that there is always a huge information gap in terms of the people there not knowing. They have certain stereotyped ideas, certain stereotyped thoughts of what India is all about or any other country is all about, and vice versa, what the Indian business thinks about it. But they need to be sort of, brought up to date. And I think this is what the Prime Minister has done. He has said changes are taking place, ease of doing business from 142 to 130. 12 places we have gone ahead, infrastructure we have, again what we hear, whether it is roads and other things.
All the good sides of the economy, and ensure, as he said, as you also said, that the line on land of opportunities, as India has been projected out to be. But Ambassador Sajjan, the fact that you also mentioned that his visit to Saudi Arabia, UAE, Iran, now of course followed by Qatar, do you think that the regional dynamics between these countries, is that going to have any sort of influence in how India is going to deal with these nations?
No, I think, you see, there is, as was mentioned, there is a contestation in the region, between Iran and Saudi Arabia, and Iran is also coming into its own. So, Qatar and Saudi Arabia have been aligned with each other. So also United Arab Emirates has been with them. So, basically between Shias and the Sunnis, this is happening, and what we see also the rise of the Islamic State, whether it is in Iraq or it is in Syria, they are finding themselves under some bit of pressure now with the Syrian forces coming into their capital Raqqa, and also in Iraq there have been sort of some advances that have been made. So there is that conflict, but I think what we really need to do is we need to have our bilateral relations with all these countries on strong footing, on firm footing, expand. Of course, there is a regional perspective as far as we also are concerned.
Right.
After all, we have 8 million of our diaspora, of our people who are there. That means 1/3 of the total Indian diaspora anywhere is in the Middle East. And our trade is worth $112 billion. We import more than 2/3 of our energy requirements from
these countries.
From these countries. So, regionally they become very, very important, and that is why the Prime Minister has decided to go there. And our relations really should not be taken in in a unifocal manner, in a monochromatic manner, that there is one particular issue. There are a large number of issues, and here our engagement has been expanding.
There is something very interesting about this round of visits that the Prime Minister is making. And here, Mr. Sanjay Kapoor, I'd like to have your view on this. Switzerland is the third stop, and interestingly, here too, the thing is very clear. It's largely going to be on the black money issue. We know the concerns that India has around that particular issue. How crucial do you think is going to be this aspect, this part of his visit?
I mean, let's be clear. I mean, black money is important, but Prime Minister is also traveling furiously to get a membership of the nuclear suppliers group.
Yeah.
And that is the reason he would be going to the US and to Mexico. So you have to balance it. I mean, you can't have a single focus to a trip. So Switzerland is synonymous with the black money hoarding. In fact, in 2009 and subsequently even later than that, BJP's plank was to get the black money back home, and as soon as possible. And if you remember, the Prime Minister promised that once the black money comes in, there will be 15 lakh which will be deposited in everybody's account. So there is a certain symbolism which is associated. It's not that the PM is going to go and the money is going to come back.
Sure.
It doesn't happen like that.
That's right.
It required great amount of financial muscle on the part of a country which is demanding.
But very symbolism, as you just said.
Yeah, but I think there is a great amount of symbolism, and there is a certain pressure which is coming on tax havens, although Switzerland is not a tax haven, because there are other tax havens, that you need to come clean. That happened after Panama paper, that happened even at that time you had the Liechtenstein papers and HSBC accounts. So there has been a string of so-called black money related events which has put the people who put money in these tax havens, in Swiss accounts, to come out in the open. So PM going there, I'm sure, is going to talk about it. There is, I think there is a big gap between how we perceive our money to be there, because I traveled once to investigate Hassan Ali Khan's funds there, and I was told by the Swiss Bankers Association that the amount of money that you say is not so much, and on top of that there is a lag in your understanding as well as our comprehension of what you actually want.
Okay.
And sometimes, the quality of evidence or the papers that are required from India which has to travel there, those aren't complete. So it happened with the Bofors account, it happened with Hassan Ali Khan account. So the infirmities are within us in terms of what kind of information we can garner, how we can pursue the people who have money stashed abroad.
Okay.
And that is why, there is nothing, time moves on from one scandal to another.
But you began your answer with a very important note, which is on the NSG. Well, how India is very hopeful about it, and that is one of the key agendas of this 5-nation tour. But Ambassador Sajjanhar, how do you think it's going to be possible with India's pursuance in this particular case on NSG membership?
Well, we should be becoming members of MTCR, the Missile Technology Control Regime, hopefully tomorrow. and we have the support of the United States and a large number of other countries. As far as NSG is concerned, we have been working on it. The government has been working on it for the last, ever since the unique waiver in 2008 was given by the NSG to commercial civilian nuclear commerce with India on technology and on material. So I think whatever we have been able to do, whatever our record was till that time, and whatever we have been able to do over the last 8 years, I think that is evidence, that is testimony to the 48 members of NSG. So we are making our case, and I am hopeful that we'll be able to move forward significantly in that. But if you give me, permit me for just one more point that I would like to make, as far as Switzerland is concerned, because I have been there, I have spent 4 years plus, and I have been traveling to that country also. NSG is important, and in the current context, it's very, very important. Black money is very important, symbolism and otherwise also. But we also need to be cognizant of the fact that Switzerland is our 5th largest trading partner.
Yes.
It is about our 10th or 11th largest investor in the country. And one aspect on which we have been focusing a great deal is in terms of collaborating on skill development, because that is an area where Switzerland has perfected how to get its people from schools, colleges and universities, and through training, through a trilateral collaboration between academia, universities, business and the government, how to have skill training for them, so that they might not go very high as far as formal educational qualifications are concerned, but they do get the skills to get them profitably employed and engaged in industry and business. So this is something that has been going on, and also whether it is renewable energy or other areas, there are so many possibilities.
And another high point, which I'm afraid we have really no time, but I'll take a view from you on that. Prime Minister Modi will be addressing the joint session of Congress in United States of America, and he becomes the 5th Indian Prime Minister to be doing so. How crucial is going to be that part, the 4th leg of his visit?
Very. I think that's going to be
about
the most significant, and this address to the joint session of the US Congress, I think that further underlines and emphasizes that there is bipartisan support for good relations with India. Some people have been raising the question as to why is the Prime Minister traveling there when Obama is a lame duck president. I am, I think that a question, doesn't really need to be posed, because whichever administrations have come in the United States, after Clinton to Bush to Obama, all of them have been very supportive of expanding relations with India. Obama himself in 2009 when he came, he said it is the defining partnership of the 21st century.
Right.
So irrespective of whichever other administration, but I think the Congress right through the 50s and 60s till now has been very supportive, and I'm sure he'll be very warmly welcomed, he'll be enthusiastically welcomed, and it'll give him an opportunity to chalk out his vision for the future of India-US relations.
And absolutely, and it also comes at a time when India is underlining and its reconstruction projects in Afghanistan, the war-torn country of Afghanistan. Well, on that note, I'll have to say goodbye to you. Thank you very much, Ambassador Sajjan Har, for joining me here.
Thank you.
We'll take a very quick break now in Insight, and then after the break, a look at another important story of the day. Please stay tuned. Welcome back. In Insight now, a look at the situation in Manipur. Agitations in Manipur to implement some form of the inner line permit, which restricts entry of outsiders in the state, has started anew, even as protests against the ILP are also growing. In August last year, the Manipur government had passed 3 bills to appease the pro-ILP stir, which began in June the same year and was led by people from Imphal Valley to restrict outsiders from entering the state without permission. It took a violent turn when 9 tribal youths were killed in police firing during the protest in Manipur's Churachandpur district. Since then, the protests have been growing.
For the past few days, Manipur has been on the boil, as the people from the hills and valley are divided over the 3 bills which seek to regulate influx of outsiders. These bills are seen as anti-tribals by the protesting communities. Several lives have been lost in the 10-month-long protests. Protesters have alleged that the Manipur government has been ignoring their demand for a political solution to the matter. An all-party delegation minus the Naga People's Front is in Delhi to seek the centre's help. It remains to be seen if this crisis can be resolved with centre's intervention. Bureau report.
And Home Minister Rajnath Singh has expressed his unhappiness over the way the issue of anti-migrant bills of Manipur awaiting presidential assent is being politicized. But this is not the first time Manipur is witnessing protests. Though these groups are now targeting the state government for the present crisis, but is it appropriate to blame the Ibobi government? With the assembly elections barely 9 months away, what kind of impact will this crisis have on the political situation in the state? How far can the centre go in resolving this present crisis, and what are the options available? To talk more on this, I'm joined by Mr. E.N. Ram Mohan, former DG BSF, and he was also former advisor to the Governor of Manipur, and Mr. Sanjay Kapoor, editor, Hard News. Well, let me start the discussion with you, Mr. Ram Mohan. How do you look at the present round of protests which are going on, though this has been going on for days and months on end? Sadly, not much of it gets reported in the media, but we all know how Manipur suffers.
Well, one has to try and understand the Northeast. It is very different from the rest of India. You see, Northeast and particularly Manipur is basically a tribal state. The Meiteis, who are the majority population who live in the valley, are actually really tribals. They are not Hindus. They have their own animist religion. Some of them have got converted to Christianity, very small number. People who live in the hills all around the valley, actually Manipur, the valley is in the center, and the whole north, south, east, west are all hills. It's a long state completely. And all the people who live in these hills, they are tribals. They are not Hindus, they are not Christians. Some of them have become Christians. Many of them are still animist. The Nagas, most of the Naga tribes have become Christian, but even now the Zeliang Nagas are animist. Now, Tamenglong district is entirely of Zeliang Nagas, and there are 3 sub-tribes who live there. Meiteis themselves really are tribals, though some of them claim that they are Hindus. Some of them have become Hindus, but then their brand of Hinduism is very frankly not like the Hinduism of the rest of India. They don't have any classes. The Meiteis, of course, again because of Hinduism coming in there, have Brahmins and Kshatriyas and Vaisyas. But very frankly, there is this kind of class distinction doesn't exist in Manipur. As far as the tribals are concerned, there is no class distinction at all. There is no different caste there. Anyone can be elected as a leader, can become a leader. So this kind of thing, when we see it from the mainland, we should try to understand them before we try to put some laws there. It doesn't work in this.
So do you think that this move was, how do you look at the 3 pieces of legislations which seek to ensure that the migrants, the outsiders, are not encouraged within the state?
These legislations are from Delhi?
Yeah, these legislations were drafted after a joint committee had the meeting with the government there, and accordingly the assembly had cleared these legislations in an emergency session last year.
Assembly
the
in
fact
Manipur.
that the Manipur assembly, the fact that these legislations, let me ask you this question, Mr. Sanjay Kapoor, how do you look at the response that that this has generated since the August of last year? In fact, before that, the protest had been going on for some time now, but the response after the assembly had cleared these 3 legislations.
I mean,
The
if you
bills
look at
were
it,
there.
there is a great amount of outrage. There is a certain amount of choreography that you would also see in how this agitation has been, played out in a certain way. The Joint Action Committee, which is there on the inner line permit, they have been able to get number of these school children to be at the vanguard of their movement. So you look at those images, school children wearing school uniform, being hosted by a fire brigade, and those are going viral in a certain way. So there's so much of hashtagging that you would see entirely, pushed by the Meiteis there. And all this actually got triggered off in the last 2 years, if you look at it. I mean, more so particularly after the Naga Accord last year. And there was a certain amount of uncertainty in the minds of the Western interest which is there in Manipur. pertaining to whether the state would come apart, because the Nagas had begun to assert, and they thought that there was a certain amount of pressure they could put on the state government as well as in the center, because they thought that if the Naga accord and Nagas could be accommodated, so could the Meiteis, and the same thing would happen in Manipur. And on top of that, you also have in the northeast a certain anti-migrant mindset. I mean, you had in Assam an entire anti-migrant, anti-outsider movement, which kind of gave dividends to the party which was pushing for the entire movement. So you have the results. So it it has a rub-off effect. It starts getting aggravated, and on top of that, you also have reports which have begun to come that the person who was leading this entire inner line permit movement, a gentleman called Ratan, he is linked to a proscribed organization, and Facebook, Twitter, all these things are making the whole thing so incendiary and so difficult that you don't know when the next thing is going to blow up there. And on top of that, you have the entire delegation which has come here to Delhi to seek the intervention of the Home Minister, and you have the President who's sitting on those 3 bills.
But there were reports that the Naga People's Front is not a part of this delegation.
So Nagas are not there. That's what I'm saying, because Nagas,
the tribals themselves are not.
After the Naga Accord last year, their entire attitude has changed. I mean, there is a certain amount of belligerence and there is a certain amount of arrogance that has come into it, and they look at a larger Naga space for themselves, and that is what is causing a certain amount of vulnerability.
Mr. Kapoor, the fact that this delegation, there were reports that the delegation would be reaching on Friday, then there were reports that probably the delegation is not going to land here in Delhi at all. How do you look at the leadership of these states, specifically that of the Manipur? Because
you look at the leadership of Manipur. The elections are in 2017. That's next year, and you have the Manipur is under the Congress rule, and the Congress is a party which is struggling to figure out what is the next move. They have seen many of their states collapse. You've seen what happened in Arunachal Pradesh. You've seen what happened in Assam. One by one, you have the domino effect.
Yeah.
And here, the Chief Minister, Mr. Singh, thinks that he would be in a position to push together an anti-migrant and permit-based system, which would ensure that any person, an outsider who is coming, sports, although the same system works in other states, like in Arunachal Pradesh and others, it's all a British legacy.
Yeah.
He thinks that by bringing in, he would have the support of the Meiteis, the people who live in the valley, and that could probably drive him back to success, electoral success in 2017. But I think what is happening, the mood on the ground is changing very rapidly. BJP is coming very, very aggressively, in the sense that they are at the center, they are in a position to do many things, and the Minister of State for Home, Mr. Rijiju, is making very interesting noises. He is saying that they are not averse to what about the anti-migrant bill, as long as it doesn't hurt anybody. So they are playing on both sides. So it's a time for politics, and it's the politics which is playing out in different ways. But what is really happening is the state is getting hurt very badly. Every day you have demonstration. You have beginning Saturday. If you look at it, you have statewide bandh, and all the shops are closed. All the women come out because it's a largely women-dominated society, and it's because, as you were discussing earlier, it doesn't get any kind of attention in national media. You watch TV, they are not there. You watch till the time you have a major fire or a lot of people die, their news doesn't get into.
Maybe not many people knew about the amount of protest and the number of days.
Yeah, it goes on endlessly,
Yeah.
and when you have blockade,
hundreds and 200 days. I mean, we are talking about a state and the state of affairs in that state.
It's a very insensitive attitude of people who decide, or who at least control the eyeballs, to not pay attention to what's happening in Manipur.
So
till
we
the
have
time
curfews,
it goes beyond the critical level.
bandhs, shutdowns, sit-ins, and then there is this fear of
And all
tear
the
gas
school
shells,
children,
stun bombs, and yes, he's absolutely right. There are
Charlie,
children
all
on the
school
road.
children have been roped into the movement.
There are women on the roads, there are youth, and when there is a death of the nature, well, certainly I mean, it's a very sorry state of affairs. But let's also look at the ILP here. The ILP is a special permit which is required to enter certain restricted areas in the country. As one gathers, the system is already in place in Arunachal Pradesh, Nagaland and Mizoram. The history, where does it take us, Mr. Ram Mohan? This demand for ILP in Manipur is also not very recent. There are some reports which suggest that the first demand for restoration of the ILP was made in Parliament in 1980s. Would you please like to throw some light on this?
I can only tell you one thing. The valley of Manipur, where the Meiteis live, they are actually really tribals, but they have got converted to a kind of very loose kind of Hinduism, and you have Brahmins and Kshatriyas and even scheduled castes among them. But very strictly speaking, they are also tribals like the others. Now, all these areas surrounding the valley, north, east, south, west, these are all hills,
right,
and they are all tribals. And in all these areas, the 6th schedule of the Constitution works. That means no tribal land can be transferred to non-tribal. So, no non-tribal can own any land in any of these hill areas, but this apply to the valley. Now, the Meiteis want this to be applied to the valley also. But then at the same time, you see, it is like asking for two things. You have caste Hinduism, and at the same time you say that you should not allow our land to be taken away. It is not practical. As far as the hills are concerned, it is a very sensible thing to continue it like that. There is no problem.
But how crucial is this some migrant population issue?
You see, like for example, anybody who wants to start a business, cannot own land there, because land cannot be transferred from a tribal to a non-tribal. That applies even in Meghalaya. It applies in Arunachal Pradesh. Meghalaya, I was SP Shillong. My cadre is Assam Meghalaya. I was SP Shillong for 2 terms. Except for a small area which is the municipality area, an exemption has been made where land can be transferred to non-tribal. The rest of the whole of Meghalaya, no non-tribal can purchase 1 square foot of land.
And what do you think is the real challenge for the administration there, Mr. Ram Mohan?
Actually, there is no challenge at all. It's best to leave the tribals to themselves.
But these tribals,
the main point here is
there are reports now that they have arms, ammunitions. They were protesting
the Nagas
earlier.
had long time ago. They took up arms right in the British days.
So
we have fought with them. We have finally signed a peace agreement with them, and the main force there was the Naga underground. Other tribal groups have taken arms, but they are not so strong.
But but how serious are these protests?
Now,
I mean, if one has to look at the violent nature.
As far as administration is concerned, why should we try to get their land transferred to us? Let them own the land, that's all right. They're tribals, they live there. There is no such problem about this.
But do you think that this indeed is one of the issues which the political parties would like to take mileage of? I mean, has this been the experience?
I think, you see, because basically I think it is because of the change of government here in Delhi.
Okay. So that is basically a response.
This particular thing was a little bit very relaxed about applying the things. But the present government here in Delhi, they probably want to enforce some of these laws.
You see, this kind of restlessness one often experiences in the northeastern part of this country. The fact that they would like to have, a direct link with the government at the center, and there is of course this restlessness as we had just talked about, and the leadership which doesn't seem to be in a very strong position in either of these states. I mean, look back at Arunachal, you find the same example. Look here in Manipur, it's even worse because of the law and order situation, because of its geography and some other reasons. Do you think that all these factors put together leave Manipur in such a sorry state?
It is not just Manipur. I mean, you look at the history of the northeast region, you would realize that there has been a very strong presence of security forces, primarily, as my fellow panelist Mr. Ram Mohan has said, it started off with Nagaland, and they have been very, very aggressive in terms of somehow asserting their nationality. And if you can just look at it, it's been 65-70 years and 65 years since we became independent. Till last year, they were able to extricate a treaty or an agreement which actually is loaded in their favor. So that shows a certain way their negotiating skills, their ability to spread that message of Naga nationalism in their particular area, which actually has a spillover effect. I mean, some kind of demonstration effect which shows up in other tribal areas. So if you look at it from that standpoint, there is a certain amount of turbulence, aggravated also by the center's apathy, large scale corruption, absence of industry, and the fact that these are border states. So there has been a mindset from the very early days that you don't have industry in border states. It is a legacy of 1962, because you had the Chinese who stepped into Arunachal Pradesh, and the fear was that if you create assets, they are the ones who will benefit from it. So, although a lot of things may have changed, because now you have the look east policy, and there is an attempt to first develop the east so that you can take advantage of the look east policy. So, some industry, greater tourism, greater amount of investment in tourism, that is all happening. But the problem is that people do not have jobs, there is a certain amount of violence that the presence of the security forces bring to any place, whether it is Kashmir or whether it is anywhere. And if you talk to any security personnel in India, they would say that the only experience they have is either being posted in northeast or Kashmir. So, it's a brutalized, it's a traumatized state, and that is where things start going wrong, because you have chief ministers who broker the violence to their advantage.
I think, yeah, that's one of the reasons. But Mr.
Enormous amount of money they make, through lotteries, through this, such, unimaginable corruption is there in these areas that, is in Delhi is difficult to comprehend.
And which often also doesn't get reported to the extent
Never
it
gets
should
reported.
be.
But I tell you, there are so many people who are very rich in Delhi who have benefited from northeast corruption. We don't even know. They look very civilized and very good, but they are the ones who provide all kinds of supplies.
Now, how do you look at there happens to be a dilemma in the case as to who is going to find a solution to this crisis. The fact that the delegation is here, which is an all-party delegation set to meet the Home Minister and maybe other leaders here in Delhi to find some sort of an answer. There had been some reports which suggest that the Manipur government believes that the onus for bringing in the ILP completely rests with the centre, because that would mean some sort of an amendment in the constitution too. This is what some of the sources reveal. But what exactly looks like the way forward here?
I mean, the fact is that since the time, as Sir said, in the last 2 years, the people have recognized a little gap which they can take advantage because of the change of the government here. That entire earlier paradigms have got destabilized or subverted, and they think that the central government can come to the rescue. And they have seen it, how things have happened in Nagaland, in Arunachal Pradesh, and what has happened in Assam. The Congress is very vulnerable. They haven't a clue how to save their party, their influence or their ideology, and they will end up wilting under pressure. It is a matter of time when that happens. If it doesn't happen now, it will happen when the election takes place. So, it has to go through a process. It will be a very painful process, and I don't think anybody has the influence or power to intervene at this juncture and do it, because you will have a delegation which is here now, and the Home Minister has expressed rightly his entire dissatisfaction as to how these bills are getting politicized. But nobody has the power to withdraw or call off the agitation till the time there is something substantive that takes place, and nothing substantive is going to come about, because the positions are so hardened, whether it is of the Meiteis who think that this is the way forward, because they give examples of the 3-4 states where the permits are given, and they think that this is the way to preserve your tribal identity. And the issue of identity has become so strong and so compelling, primarily because of what it does, what they can do through the social media and through other images that they can put out, that nobody is really going to back off. What has also happened at the same time, that you have a banned proscribed organization whose leader was seen to be also the convener of the joint committee on inner line permit, and he is the one who's got award on his head. And the impression that is being created is that actually this entire movement is being backed by banned organization, by a terror organization, and IB and all these organizations knew about it. So, if there is an attempt to criminalize them, and if it's an attempt, so it is going to get worse.
It's going to get worse.
So,
and how crucial and how challenging is it going to be for the region and the security concerns in that region?
I've got 2-3 points to contribute to this whole thing. One thing I am very clear about this, that as far as possible, leave the tribals alone. Let them have their own tribal laws and let them run their areas themselves, because very frankly, their style of life is entirely different from our Hinduism's way of life,
from our understanding of things.
Yes. Those who are converted to Christianity, they still continue their religion, but otherwise they are completely tribal. One place where we have very strongly failed in the northeast is in allowing smuggling of drugs. So, a whole lot of drugs keep coming in from the northeast, and Manipur is the worst place in this respect. Not so much Arunachal, it is mostly through Manipur that heroin is coming inside.
Okay.
I was SP Shillong for many years. I have recovered packets of 1 kilo packets of heroin with the label Khunsa. I don't know whether you
I know
ring the
Khunsa.
names of it.
So the
Khunsa
controlling
is
of
one
the
biggest
drug mafia, as you
dealers in
said.
Thailand.
Yeah.
He's a Shan.
Burma,
From
Burma.
Burma.
Burma
But he was
Myanmar,
virtually in the Thailand border, and
Okay.
most of it is
Yeah.
his opium, which is grown on the eastern borders of Burma. It goes into China.
He's
So
dead.
crackdown on this drug mafia is as
and
important
that
as
1 kilo packet was seized in Shillong.
Okay.
Where is Shillong and where is the border? It's miles away. So this smuggling from this border has been on right through. And it comes down from there to Dum Dum Airport, and from Dum Dum Airport it goes abroad.
I think we really need
Now,
to.
we have to look into this very strongly. And as far as possible, as far as the administration is concerned, leave the tribals and their tribals lost to themselves.
So there are
First
problems.
of all, nobody is getting land there. I cannot buy land there. You cannot buy land there. So let them have their areas and
Have
let
a
them
better
live
understanding
with
of the
their tribal
situation
laws.
on the ground, ensure that the tribals, as you said,
Yes.
get to exercise their rights,
Yes.
and at the same time check these
Yes,
crimes,
yes.
because you know
Because
this is
in
how
this is smuggling which has been going on.
yeah.
Tribals certainly have a role in it, but the non-tribals have a much bigger role, and they get the most of the profits.
Fine,
So
fine.
we have
On-
made a very serious mistake in this thing.
Fine. I think every such incident gives us an opportunity to look into the problems as well as the mistakes that anybody has made, and of course a chance to correct them. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining me here. That's all for today in Insight. Thanks very much for watching. Goodbye.